Hopefully you've spent a good amount of time with us, and you know that we've spoken at length about dive watches and their history. You can date the advent of the modern dive watch to 1953, with the debut of both the Rolex Submariner and the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, and technically the Zodiac Seawolf, as watchmakers began to capitalize on the growing commercial market that was interested in the rapidly growing sport of recreational diving. True vintage dive watches are often horological grails, often tough to find, often expensive, often worn down by time, and often requiring a good deal of potentially costly regular servicing. Not to mention, they'll give you a good amount of anxiety around any water because of their age. If you like their designs though, the next best investments are vintage-inspired dive watches. Dive watches made by the same watchmakers with period-accurate designs and robust modern movements. And usually better water resistance as well. This is one of our favorite watch subcategories, so we're eager to dive right in, pardon the pun, and we'll do so first with collector and historian turned watchmaker Dan Henry's 1970. Using archetypal vintage watches as his panoptic inspiration, Dan Henry continues to breathe new life into the watches that he designs. As a well-regarded watch collector, turned scholar, and now watchmaker, Henry offers up one of the best affordable vintage-inspired dive watches with the 1970 automatic diver. Ours here in 44mm, but also available in 40 as well. At first glance, the 1970 is an amalgam of retro references. We're seeing a bit of vintage IWC aqua timer, we're seeing some Longines legend diver, throw in a little rarity with a Whitnauer vintage super compressor, and some color, and hey, you'll come damn close to what Henry has offered up with in 1970. Interior bezels were a product of the late 60s and early 70s, right around the time when the sport quickly gained steam that was fueled by figures like famed diver and TV personality Jacques Cousteau. Watchmakers raced to make the most capable diver, and one method of doing so was to scrap the exterior bezel and instead build it into the interior of the case itself. So instead of the 1970 having one screw-down crown, it has two. The topmost at the 2 o'clock actually controls the bidirectional rotation of the interior timing bezel, and the 4 controls the handset and the date at the 3. 44mm of 316L on the wrist, 50.5mm lug-to-lug, and a hefty 14.8mm thickness. Not totally unforgivable or at all surprising for a diver with an internal bezel, which does add a few millimeters of thickness to the case. But there does also exist that 40mm version of the 1970 for anyone who's looking for all-around smaller proportions, that one having a far more compact 45.7mm lug-to-lug, but still just as thick. A mix of high polish and brushing graces the main case, and we like that the added texture of the front sides of the crown that feel almost like the crisscross supports of an old brass diving helmet. And speaking of, the engraved case back rocks an octopus sporting just the helmet that we're speaking of. Check it out. Under a subtly curved sapphire, the dial packs in plenty of depth with its applied elements, most of which are awash in lume, as is the chapter ring and the inverted triangle on the inner bezel. We do wish the numerals on the inner bezel came loomed as well, but it doesn't much affect the functionality since the chapter ring has fixed numerals that glow plenty bright. Inside, Dan Henry employs a very reliable and widely used Seiko NH35 that you'll have absolutely no issues getting service for if anything does happen during your time with the watch. The 200 meters of water resistance keeps everything within the case nicely protected, so feel free to bring the 1970 on light dives. We also love that the 1970 comes with a period-accurate tropic-style strap, made popular by Swiss venture Vulcan in the 1960s. This one is a 24mm unit to match the larger proportions of this case, but the 40mm also uses a smaller 22. The 44mm 1970 is a limited edition, peep the case back, but there's a small chance Henry will do what he did with the 1972 and later release an unlimited run with a number of subtle design changes. Who knows? Around the $500 mark, our pick for a vintage-inspired diver has to be Laurier's Hydra Series 2 diver, the third iteration of the microbrand's core collection dive watch model. Laurier only released their first design circa 2017-2018, the Hydra following soon after that. Named after the nine-headed beast in the expansive pantheon of Greek mythology, a monster bred by Hera to kill the great hero Hercules. In other words, like the multi-headed monster, Laurier wanted this diver to check as many boxes as possible, a multifaceted beast, as they call it. So yes, not only is it an extremely capable diver with 200 meters of dependable water resistance, a 41mm case constructed from 316L marine grade stainless steel, a 120 click timing bezel, and heaps of bright BGW9 Superluminova and C1, but the Hydra also offers the vintage elegance of a refined everyday wear piece, and even more practically, a four-handed Miota movement classifying it as a GMT just as much as it is a diver. Now, touching on the lume for just a second, you most often just have one type of lume applied to or inlaid within specific elements of a dial, usually around this price point, and Laurier actually uses both BGW9 and C1 strategically to visually delineate between two separate time zones. The bezel insert, inner dial markers, and handset use a brilliant blue BGW9, while the outer 24-hour track as well as the inlay within the fourth hand uses C1, which does light up as green in the dark with similar intensity. Under a 2.4mm domed tessellite, the handset itself is also a mix of styles, something that certainly evokes watches of old more so than recent creations. We get Arrow, we get Dauphine, and a unique diamond shape for the red-colored fourth hand. Laurier prefers and uses Japanese-made Miyota calibers for just about every current core collection model. What we have built into the Series 3 Hydra is the 9070 automatic, which offers that fourth hand, most notably, but also an impressive 4Hz beat rate and a useful power reserve of 42 hours when fully wound. Plus, a handsome 3-link bracelet with screw pins holding the links to each other is tangibly well executed, as is the feeling of the push-button clasp that builds in 3 micro-adjustments to find the perfect fit. Compression divers or super compression divers often use a dual crown or twin crown system in order to house a timing bezel under the crystal. Watchmakers like Hamilton, Zenith, Blancpain, and Longines, to name a few, launched these divers about a decade or so after the commercial diving craze of the mid to late 50s. Lately, we've seen quite the resurgence of dual crown divers with distinctly vintage charm, with the steady popularity of both dive watches and vintage reissues alike. In other words, this is the same as what we saw with Dan Henry's 1970. Even younger watchmakers like Baltic out of France have joined the party, and they offer up a version of their flagship, vintage-style dive line, the Aquascaphe, with a dual crown treatment. Brief tech specs and then we'll unpack why we love it so much. 39mm in diameter, 47mm lug-to-lug, and a very thin 10mm thickness without the 1.9mm single dome of the Sapphire. Baltic crushes it with the case finishing, for their current micro-brand status, only having widely offered their watches for sale under the Baltic moniker since circa 2017. Take a look here. The case uses different subtle directions of brushing along the side, along the top of the lugs, and on top of the fixed bezel. You'll notice upon further observation that they've kept all the major edges or bevels uncoated and highly polished, as if a watchmaker hand-finished the edges to a mirror shine themselves. No doubt with Baltic this may have been the case. The dual crown system is composed of a fixed crown that rotates freely, doesn't push in or pull out to operate, to adjust the internal bidirectional timing bezel. We have mixed feelings about this for actual diving, seeing as the watch does come with 200 meters of water resistance to do so. You do risk hitting the crown and screwing up your timing if it doesn't lock down like your average screw down unit normally would. This is technically period accurate, but for modern convenience, we just don't know. But just beneath is an actual screw down crown at the fore, and this functions as usual just to adjust the handset. Bubbly lume markers of different shapes adorn the dial, a thick baton handset keeps our time, and the second shows off a smooth sweep, hinting at the 4Hz beat rate of the Miyota automatic 9039 at its heart. This movement comes equipped with a 42-hour power reserve as well, but it's most known for its space savings at only 3.9mm in height, and that highly accurate beat rate. For the price above $500 but well below $1,000, it really is an excellent value. And of course, the 20mm Tropic-inspired strap secures to drilled lugs, uses quick-release spring bars, and tapers by a few millimeters, concluding with Baltic-branded pin buckle hardware. Up next, the Zodiac Super Seawolf Compression Diver. Lesser known to the general public than other household names released alongside this diver circa 1953 like the Rolex Sub and Blancpain 50 Fathoms, the Zodiac Super Seawolf Compression is an incredible value with a similar history as these other horological icons, and still uses a form factor quite faithful to the originals, albeit with new, fresh dial colors. Before we get into the weeds about this newly released green dial version, there are a few Seawolf families that you should know about that use the Seawolf name. The Seawolf Skin Divers, the Seawolf GMTs, and the Seawolf Compression series, which sports this specific styling you see today, of which there are a handful of colors, strap options, and case materials. Anyway, 40mm across the stainless steel case, roughly 47mm lug-to-lug, and about 13mm thick. This combination does produce an excellent wearing experience for a modern dive watch, vintage inspiration aside. Even for a small wrist, we'd maintain that the Seawolf Compression should be a highly wearable choice for most everyone. Did you know that the Seawolf was actually the first dive watch to use a bezel with 15-minute markers? Well, now you do. This one in particular uses an aqua blue insert with a stainless steel frame and light green markers. The case comes with proper dive utility as well, despite its heavily vintage flair, with 200 meters or 660 feet of water resistance, protected with a screw down crown on the right flank that looks great proportionally, but is just a touch hard to grip and screw down. Under Sapphire, with just a hair of curve, Zodiac uses an analogous green scheme. Bright green for a peripheral protractor, the obvious dark inner green circle housing the raised and loomed rectangular hour markers, the elegant white script and polished logo above the handset, plus a green frame date at the 3. Even though initial Seawolves famously used a sharp Dauphine handset, we saw them start to square off by the late 60s through the 70s. And while we're on the handset, now would be a good time to talk about the new STP-121 caliber, which Zodiac has employed over the older STP-111. It offers a 4Hz beat rate, you may have been able to ascertain from the notably smooth sweep of the seconds, and it also offers a moderate 40-hour power reserve on a full wind. Attached to the case is a 5-row stainless steel bracelet by way of quick-release spring bars for toolless swaps, a mix of brushing and high polish, and it concludes with a sleek butterfly clasp, which you need to seat in a specific order to properly close. Alright, moving on. We have said it before, but we'll say it again. If there is one thing that Doxa knows, it is vintage-inspired dive watches. They've been at it since 1889, so trust us that one of the most obvious, best vintage-inspired dive watch picks is a reference from Doxa. This time around, we've chosen the Sub 300 Sharkhunter, the black dial version of the iconic professional orange colorway. The Sub 300 Sharkhunter uses a distinctly old-school full stainless steel barrel-shaped 42.5mm case with a screw-down crown that affords 300 meters of water resistance. Before anyone does hastily point it out, we will be the first to say that yes, the Sub 300T Sharkhunter is technically the more adept diver with 1200 meters of water resistance and a helium release valve, but the 300 maintains far more vintage-inspired design considerations than the more utilitarian 300T. We digress. The Sub 300 Sharkhunter measures a modest 45mm lug to lug and 13.4mm in height, which, as we mentioned along with the 42.5mm diameter, places the watch comfortably in everyday wear scenarios. Everyday wear aside, any dive watch worth its weight needs a timing bezel. They can range between uber functional to mere placeholders, but in this case, the bezel on the Doxa Sub 300 Sharkhunter falls firmly in the first camp. For serious users, the unidirectional timing bezel with depth indicators are critical. And if that's the only gauge on hand, we'd say it's absolutely essential for safety. Even though Doxa doesn't lean too hard on lume for legibility, it does still employ generous amounts on the markers and hands, and even provides a date punch-out at the 3. Powering the sporty diver is a trusty ETA 2824-2 Swiss automatic movement that extends across a wide range of Doxa references. It's solid, reliable, and durable, having been used since the early 80s from the likes of Tissot, Hamilton, and Tudor, just to name a few. Providing 38 hours of power or plenty of reserve for far more than a couple regular dives, the COSC certified caliber is one that will certainly not buckle under pressure. And rounding out its features, the Beads of Rice style stainless steel bracelet affords a lot of flexibility on the wrist, which in turn translates to a high degree of comfort. It also looks so old school and uses 2 levels of polish and a folding clasp that showcases the iconic Doxa fish logo. Officially opened for business in the mid-1920s, Swiss-based Nivada Grenchen quickly became a watch supplier who recognized the value of adopting automatic movements, eventually leading them to offer watches with these calibers en masse after a time of crafting fully mechanical ones. However, the manually wound Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver is considered by most to be the eminent embodiment of the brand. It's a highly utilitarian, multifaceted pilot and diver hybrid, debuting in the early 60s, originally employing a manually wound Valjoux caliber. Ours here now employing the manually wound SIII SW510M BHB. Nivada actually went dormant for some time and only recently revived circa 2018 by 2 veteran entrepreneurs in the watch industry who understood the brand's vintage appeal and figured it was high time to begin a modern operation once again. They've officially brought back the Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver, now offered in an automatic and a mechanical version, but have kept the revival as a near-carbon copy of the original. This is such a classically designed chronograph, one that was branded to be both a solid all-around watch for just about any activity, hence the Aviator Sea Diver designation under the handset. Now, admittedly, the utility of this versatile hybrid dive watch doesn't pack in as much utility as, say, the Doxa Sub 300. The Chronomaster only affords 100 meters of water resistance, but this watch was originally crafted with 200 meters of water resistance in the early 60s, but the new owners of the brand have decided to dial that back just a touch, pushing this watch a bit more towards skin diver territory in terms of actual diving utility. That being said, it comes with a rich, well-rounded feature set and tons of old-school style. Timing pushers at the 2 and 4, the tachymeter, the bidirectional timing bezel, 100 meters of water resistance, and the 9 different timing features. We're extremely glad they brought this watch back and made it available to the masses. Alright, this modern Chronomaster is 38mm across the case, a compact, lug-to-lug just shy of 47, and a thickness of 13.75, which all around are very wearable proportions for just about any wrist size. Not all the Chronomaster revivals actually use sapphire, but in this case, case, we do get a double dome sapphire over the dial. The viewing experience is slightly distorted by the edges, but that's par for the course with these domed units. The center, however, maintains great clarity, where zooming comes by way of a decent amount of anti-reflective coating. Back to the timing features, as the dial comes absolutely loaded. First, we have a timeout stopwatch, then a regular stopwatch, a diving bezel, aviation timing, a tachymeter around the periphery under the crystal, a yachting timer on the right side most subdial, time zones by way of the bezel's 12-hour scale, and of course, regular timekeeping with the central handset. With all that being said, for just under $2,000, the modern revival of the Broad Arrow Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver really offers an incredible amount of style and utility, and we're just extremely excited the modern venture is thriving just as much as the sustained demand for their vintage pieces on the secondary market. The early 60s was a happening time for dive watches. We have definitely driven that point home, which is why the watches from this time, if you can still find them in decent condition, fetch a pretty penny. The Rado Captain Cook Automatic is one such rare vintage diver that was brought back from the brink within the last 10 years, and has seen a few different iterations and styles since. Technically, the 37mm size of this updated Captain Cook is the most true to the original, which used a 37mm case as well, but the overall approach and style of the Captain Cook line as a whole, the more classic, more conservative editions, that is, look and feel remarkably similar to the original, diameter aside. This is the 42mm version. Our wearer here sports a wrist dimension just shy of 8 inches for context. If you are curious about the 37, we put together an individual video review with our same wearer a while back that you can find in our channel's archive. 48 to 49mm lug to lug and about 12mm thick, accounting for the domed crystal on the top. Surrounding the dial is the bezel, Rado using a high-tech ceramic insert within a steel housing, which slopes down to meet the edge of the crystal. The dome sapphire is technically finished with anti-reflective coating. However, in general, the Rado Captain Cooks, the ones we've experienced with darker dials, tend to not have the best legibility in terms of color rendition. The actual background here looks gray or even black and low light. You have to find just the right angle to see its real color, which is a warm metallic brown. Based on the ETA 2824-2, the 03.763.835 is basically the Powermatic 80 as Rado is, like to sew, under the Swatch umbrella. Practically, it's going to provide you 80 hours of power as its main selling point. Swatch has leaned on this caliber with slightly different mods and decorations from member to member quite heavily. For any vintage style watch to come with a convenient 80 hours of power or well over 3 full days is just fine by us. And like other divers from this era, even in the sky, the 7-row beads of rice bracelet is just the icing on the cake, and really eye-catching. But unlike the originals from yesteryear, the new versions come with Rado's easy clip system, allowing you to swap without any extra tools. Now, Longines is best known for their aviation history and aviation timepieces. The Spirit Zulu Time, Navigation Big Eye, their winged hourglass logo really drives this point home. But the notable vintage and beautifully executed Legend Diver family makes a strong argument that their diver prowess and notable history there should certainly exist in the same conversation about the watchmaker's offerings. The Legend Diver is, like many other iconic modern dive watches, a late 50s recreation or reinterpretation, inspired by diving's golden age, when recreational diving as well as the professional application first started becoming mainstream. The modern Legend Diver drew its first official new millennium bread circa 2007 and has seen quite a few different variations on the theme since. Ours here is one of the most recent, a lovely matte gray take on the classic black and white scheme. This Legend is a highly wearable 39mm across the wrist with a 47mm lug to lug and a 12.7mm thickness, a dual crown case that maintains a hard-wearing water resistance rating of 300 meters and comes fully ISO 6425 compliant. The highly polished case is beautiful, less toolish in a way than past releases, a watch you could easily dress up. The dial, apart from the distinct change from a stark black and white scheme to an overwhelmingly light gray, is laid out very true to the original. Bold loomed cardinal Arabic numerals, thin markers in between, and beautiful automatic script just below a polished handset set with bright Swiss superluminova. Priced just below $3,500, the 39mm Longines Legend Diver employs the L888 caliber. Admittedly, this is just a bit disappointing that Longines used a modified automatic ETA caliber for the price tag, so the price is really tied to both the heritage of the brand, the heritage of the specific Legend Diver family, and the style itself. But this specific caliber does come COSC certified, lending it a degree of value, beating at 25,200 vibrations per hour, and it includes a monocrystalline silicone balance spring and a sizable power reserve of 72 hours when fully wound. A large part of the elegance comes by way of the 7-row beads of rice style bracelet with central links notably flatter and more elongated than the typical versions that we see. It's beautifully finished, executed with female end links and plenty of polish, carrying over much of the swagger of the main case, and it terminates with a very simple double security push button fold over clasp, one that builds in a very handy push-pull toolless quick adjustment system. When discussing true vintage-styled modern divers, there is perhaps no better poster child than the Tudor Black Bay 58, the original gilt-on black debuting in 2018 to such marveled acclaim to launch the former Rolex sibling into the horological stratosphere. Modern dive watches really became chunky in the modern era, and the Black Bay 58 really paved the way for a trend back down, the 58 maintaining a highly wearable, more period-accurate sub-40 39mm case. The zeitgeist of the 58 owes its design language to the Oyster Prince Submariner reference 7924. While it's not certainly a one-to-one revival, the ethos is intact, and the 58 is perhaps the watch that will continue to represent everything Tudor is aiming for in their modern era, despite notable releases since. As we said, the 58 maintains a 39mm diameter, a 47mm lug-to-lug, and an 11.9mm thickness. Just about perfect for most wrist sizes. Yes, technically, since then we have seen the Black Bay 54. Some would argue is the better watch, clocking in at an even smaller 37, but the 58 does a great job appeasing both wearers with larger and smaller wrist sizes alike. Even someone with a near 8-inch measurement, like our wearer here, is quite happy with the way that it renders on the wrist. By the way, we have reviewed the Tudor Black Bay 54 in detail if you're interested in vintage-style divers with small case sizes. You can find the review by using the search function at the top of our page. The 7924 was a toolish piece, purpose-built and designed to be just that. The 58 includes just a touch more elegance, just the touch less toolish in nature with hints of high polish along the case bevels, but the actual crown is a near one-to-one copy. That being said, utility has by no means been sacrificed with 200 meters of water resistance. Tudor now has some more utilitarian divers like the Pelagos and FXT, but nonetheless the Black Bay 58 could still contend in the actual diving arena if needed. As we've said before about the Black Bay 58, it's difficult to actually execute a neo-vintage styled watch, diver or not, without a dial that looks tacky as though it is trying too hard not to look like it was machined in the 21st century. Not the case here. Tudor has managed to stay true to the ethos of their diving history, but in a way that feels effortless. Unlike Longines in this regard, another major benefit of the Black Bay 58 is the manufacturer MT5402 caliber, which is COSC certified, for only $600 more than the Legend Dive. Not only is it accurate, but well suited as a daily driver, offering 70 hours of power reserve on a full wind. And the riveted bracelet has been debated. We're privy to the styling, but there's certainly folks who have called the faux rivets completely unnecessary. There are arguments to be made each way. Though we saw the first iteration of Tudor's T-fit adjustment system, we unfortunately did not get that with the 58. Instead, we have a traditional safety class with micro adjustments to hone in a fit. Though if you are looking for a Black Bay 58 with the T-fit system, we'd recommend looking toward the bronze version. Considered as one of the most well-known Swiss luxury watchmakers, it's almost difficult to imagine a time where Omega was making rugged watches for the likes of the military, but so it was in the late 40s with the advent of the utilitarian diver line, later named the Seamaster family, a family that expanded and largely became commercially available toward the mid to late 50s. The Seamaster 300, not to be confused with the Seamaster Diver 300mm, Omega's more modern-looking premier diver, is the distinctly old-school member of that family still offered by Omega, similar to how they've kept the vintage Railmaster alive. Both divers offer plenty of utility, but the retro Seamaster 300 does not sport the same helium escape valve as the 300mm. It doesn't use a date window and doesn't feature a prominent bezel. In other words, the styling is toolish, as it was in decades past, not overtly toolish by today's standards. Apart from them both maintaining 300 meters of water resistance, deciding which to go with should be a fairly easy affair, given they are both palpably dissimilar in appearance. Anyway, the Seamaster 300 measures 41mm across the case, 48mm lug-to-lug, and 13.9mm thick. It certainly looks much smaller in photographs than it wears on the wrist. The case finishes are executed in typically flawless Omega fashion, with high polish reserved for most of the main case. The unidirectional timing bezel houses a durable anodized aluminum bezel insert, encircling a domed anti-reflective sapphire crystal above the notably old-school dial. We love the broad arrow handset, by the way, and the lollipop seconds that brings a touch of playfulness. And the self-winding Omega 8912 is truly magnificent, seen through the exhibition sapphire window, showing off Geneva waves and arabesque. Mechanically impressive with a coaxial escapement, a free-sprung balance with a silicone balance spring, a 2-barrel reserve, and master chronometer certification by Metis. While the bracelet continues the case finishes and is solid in hand, comfortable on the wrist, and extremely classy, it's not necessarily noteworthy. Perhaps a quick release system would have even improved an overall already solid unit, but the traditional tool-based system is as classic as its overall vintage design. As always, thank you for joining us this week, and of course, drop us a line below with your favorite modern vintage-inspired divers if we did miss your favorite here today. Also, be sure to hit up highconsumption.com for even more curated watch guides and reviews as our staff pours their heart and soul into each and every one.